Start with this lesson's content, let's go over your Lesson 5 challenge. You had to identify the part of speech of every word in this sentence. Many trees quickly lose their leaves in winter, but the one outside my bedroom window is green and lush. After Lesson 4, you were able to identify the parts of speech in these words. Your Lesson 5 challenge required you to identify the parts of speech of the rest of the words. Were you able to do it? Let's go over them one by one. Quickly describes the word lose. So, since it describes a verb, it must be an adverb. In particular, it's an adverb of manner because it describes how or in what way something is happening. In this case, it describes how fast trees normally lose their leaves in winter. What about in? You may recall that the word in is a preposition that can be used for many different purposes depending on the context. In this case, it's a preposition of time because the word winter represents a period of time. If something happens in winter, it means that it's happening during the winter months, which means that a time is being referenced. Next, we have but. Since we didn't go into too much detail about conjunctions in Lesson 5, it would be understandable if you weren't so sure about this one. But is a coordinating conjunction. It connects two parts of a sentence that are equal. Remember, conjunctions will be covered in more detail in Module 4. But if you got this right already, great job. Next we have outside. Outside is a preposition. Since it shows at which place the tree is, it's a preposition of location. You might have guessed that it's a preposition of space, but since outside doesn't give much detail about the exact place of the tree, it's more likely that outside is a preposition of location in this case. Next we have bedroom. Now technically bedroom is a noun, but in this sentence it performs a different function. It gives more information about the noun window. What do we call words that give more information about nouns? Adjectives. Do you know what type of adjective this would be? It would be a qualifier. Remember, qualifiers are at the very end of the royal order of adjectives. They give very crucial information about nouns by placing them into specific categories. Next we have green. You might remember that colors are usually used as adjectives. In this case, the adjective green describes the tree and is another conjunction. It's also a coordinating conjunction because in this case it connects two equal words, green and lush. Last we have lush. Lush describes the tree and therefore it's an adjective. When a plant is lush, it means that it's beautiful and full. So, lush would count as an adjective that expresses a quality or opinion. In this lesson, you will learn how to use simple tenses, including past simple, present simple, and future simple. You will learn how to use perfect tenses, as well as continuous tenses and Let's start this lesson with trivia time. Is this sentence in past, present, or future tense? I created a new artwork. It's in past tense. The verb took place in the past. We know this because of the letters ed at the end of the word created. Now, what type of past tense is it? Is it past simple, past perfect, past continuous, or past perfect continuous? It's past simple. If you're not quite sure about the terms simple, perfect, continuous, and past perfect continuous, this lesson is here to help you. You will learn about the simple tenses, the perfect tenses, the continuous tenses, and the perfect continuous tenses in this lesson. This will ultimately help you to speak and write about different times in different situations, giving you the confidence to talk about a range of topics over the broad spectrum of time. Before we begin, do you know what words are modified or changed to show tense? Is it A, nouns, B, verbs, or C, adverbs? It's B, verbs. Verbs undergo changes to show the tense of the sentence. In this lesson, you will see how verbs are modified to show tense. In our first core topic, we will cover the simple tenses. First, we have past simple tense. Now, first, we need to look at the form of past simple tense. You will now be equipped with the formula to use this tense. Usually, you can simply add the letters ed to the end of a verb to show past simple tense. For example, walked, parked, created. If a verb already ends in e, like the word create, you can simply add the letter D. There are many contexts in which to use the past simple tense. The three main ones are when something happened once in the past, when something happened many times in the past, and when something was true for some time in the past. Let's go over them one by one. The first context to use past simple tense is when something happened once in the past. In other words, when something happened just one time and it's no longer happening in the present. For example, I created an artwork yesterday. She walked to school last Monday. They parked behind the building. The next context in which you can use the past simple tense is when something happened many times in the past. In other words, when something happened over and over again some time ago and is not happening anymore now. Some examples are: she jogged 5 kilometers every morning. He always played computer games in the evening. The next context for past simple tense is when something was true for some time in the past and is not happening anymore now. In other words, when something occurred for a long period of time in the past, but it's not happening anymore. For example, I lived in Canada for 3 years. I studied geography at Harvard University. The next tense is present simple tense. Present simple tense is formed by using the verb in its simplest form. Sometimes there will also be a letter S after the verb. This is simply due to conjugation rules. For example, we say, I, you, and they walk, but we say, he, she, it walks. As you can see, in present simple tense, he, she, and it give the verb the letter S at the end. You can use present simple tense in a lot of instances, like to talk about general truths, habits, instructions, repeated events, fixed arrangements. The first context in which you can use present simple tense is when you are talking about general truths. In other words, when something is widely regarded as the truth. For example, water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. We breathe oxygen. Both of these examples contain information that cannot be challenged. These are firm truths. The next context for present simple tense is when you talk about habits. Habits are things that are done or practiced regularly by someone as part of a ritual or lifestyle. For example, he drinks coffee every morning. She writes in her journal every day. They eat lots of vegetables. All of these example sentences describe habits or rituals that are regularly practiced. The next context in which to use present simple tense is when you are giving instructions. Instructions are information about how something needs to be done. For example, you are giving someone instructions when you give them directions to a destination, or when you explain to someone how to knit a scarf. Some examples of such sentence constructions are turn left onto Main Road and use good quality wool. Note that when you give instructions like this, there is no subject in these sentences. In other words, there is no noun or pronoun before the verb. There is also no S after the verb. Use the verb in its simplest form with no subject before it. The next instance in which you can use present simple tense is to speak about repeated events. In other words, events that occur regularly. These are similar to habits. For example, they walk to work every day. She goes on holiday every December. The next context is fixed arrangements. A fixed arrangement is something that has been planned, scheduled, and confirmed to happen in the near future. Even though we use present tense, it's not actually about now. It's about the future. For example, I fly to Rome tomorrow morning. School starts next week. The next type of simple tense is future simple tense. The form of future simple tense is simply the word will plus the verb in its simplest form. Some examples are will walk, will create, will appear, and so on. Note that you can also use contractions when using auxiliary verbs like will. For example, instead of I will, you can say I'll. Instead of she will, you can say she'll. Instead of he will, you can say he'll. They will becomes they'll. It will becomes it'll. You will becomes you'll. You can choose whether you want to use contractions or not. It sounds more natural to use the contracted or shortened versions when speaking, but perhaps when you are writing a formal piece, try not to use contractions. You can use future simple tense to predict a future event or express willingness to do something. The first context for future simple tense is when predicting a future event. In other words, guessing what might happen in the future. For example, it'll rain tomorrow. Note the contraction here. I didn't say it will rain, I said it'll rain. Another example is, if we go out in the cold now, I will fall ill tomorrow. These are all predictions about something that might happen in the future, but there's no way of knowing for certain that these events will definitely occur. Next, you can use future simple tense to express willingness to do something. In other words, telling someone that you are willing to do something. For example, I'll pay for our dinner tonight. I'll call you tomorrow. Now you will learn about perfect tenses. Just like simple tenses, there are also past, present, and future perfect tenses. Let's start with past perfect tense. The form of the past perfect tense is had plus the verb plus the letters ed. For example, had walked, had created, had appeared. Note that you can also use contractions when using auxiliary verbs like had. For example, instead of I had, you can say or write I'd. Instead of she had, you can say she'd. Instead of he had, you can say he'd. They had becomes they'd. It had becomes it'd. You had becomes you'd. Again, you can choose whether or not you want to use contractions. In formal situations, it's best to stay away from contractions, but if you are speaking in a natural circumstance, you can use contractions. You can use past perfect tense to talk about something that happened before something else in the past. Let's expand on that. Imagine you are talking about something that happened in the past. Then you bring up something that happened even earlier than that event in the past. That's when you use past perfect tense. For example, when James arrived at my house for dinner, I had just started making supper. In this example, James arriving to my house for dinner is in the past. But I started making dinner even before that point in the past. Therefore, the past perfect tense is used to describe the event that happened before another event in the past. Here's another example. I got home and noticed that I had locked myself out of the house. I got home in the past, but I locked myself out of the house even earlier than that. Therefore, past perfect tense is used. Next, we have present perfect tense. The form for present perfect tense is simply has or have plus the verb plus ed. Whether we use has or had depends on the rules of conjugation. For example, he, she, it has walked. I, you, they, we have walked. Note that you can also use contractions when using auxiliary verbs like have and had. You can use present perfect tense when talking about unfinished events that started in the past and continue into the present. You can also use it to talk about finished actions with a result in the present. Lastly, you can use it to talk about life experience. We can use present perfect tense to talk about unfinished events that started in the past and continue to the present. In other words, an event that started a while ago and is still happening now. For example, we've worked together for 5 years. She has lived in Australia for 6 months. The events started a while ago, but are still true now. The next instance is when talking about actions that have already been completed, but have a result now. Some examples are, I've locked myself out of my house, and I can't get into the house now. She has finished all her work, and she can leave work early now. Both of these sentences contain actions that have already been completed in the past, but they affect the present moment. The next instance in which you can use the present perfect tense is when you talk about life experience. In other words, experiences someone has in life. These experiences can include places you've been, people you've met, and so on. For example, I've traveled to 6 countries. She has visited the president. The last type of perfect tense is the future perfect tense. The form of the future perfect tense is will have plus the verb plus ed. For example, will have walked, will have climbed, will have tested. You can use future perfect tense to talk about actions that will be completed in the future. What this means is that at some point in the future, an action will be finished or completed. For example, this time next week, I will have worked here for 7 months. By the end of today, she will have finished all her lessons. Coming up in the next lesson, you are going to build on your reading skills. As you know, reading is an important part of the IELTS tests, as well as an important part of communication, especially in the digital age. You will learn how to use some reading strategies, and you will practice reading and answering questions about written texts. I look forward to seeing you at the next lesson. You will now learn about continuous tenses. We will be covering past continuous, present continuous, and future continuous tenses. First, we have past continuous tense. The form of past continuous tense is was or were plus the verb plus ing or ing. For example, I, he, she, or it was walking. we, they, or you were walking. As you can see, whether you use was or were depends on the subject. Past continuous tense is used to talk about events that began in the past and continued for a while. Let's expand on this. Past continuous tense is used to talk about events or actions that happened a while ago in the past and carried on happening continuously for some time. These events are not happening anymore now. For example, I was walking to the shops when a man in a car stopped and offered me a lift. The action of walking continued for a while in the past, and then the action stopped. Next, we have present continuous tense. The form of the present continuous tense is as follows: is, am, or are plus the verb plus ing. For example, I am walking. He, she, it is walking. And they, you, we are walking. As you can see, whether we use is, am, or are depends on the subject of the sentence. Note that you can also use contractions when using auxiliary verbs like am, is, and are. You can say I'm, she's, he's, there, it's, and you're. We can use the present continuous tense to talk about things that are happening right now, temporary events, and a new pattern or habit. Firstly, the present continuous tense can be used to talk about things that are happening right now. In other words, something that is in a continuous progress now. For example, I'm walking to the shops at the moment. She's working in the library right now. Both of these sentences describe continuous processes that are happening in the present moment. The present continuous tense can also be used to talk about temporary events. In other words, facts that are true now but will eventually end. For example, I'm staying in a hotel because my house is under construction. He's studying law at Harvard. Both of these are true events or facts, but they will eventually end. In other words, they are temporary. Next, you can use present continuous tense when you are talking about a new pattern or habit. In other words, something that is done or practiced regularly by someone as part of a new ritual or lifestyle. Now, emphasis on new. If it were an old habit, you could just use present simple tense instead. Some examples are, she's waking up at 5 a.m. now. He's eating more vegetables than usual nowadays. Note that these are all newly formed habits. The people in the sentence only recently took on these habits or patterns. The last type of continuous tense is the future continuous tense. The future continuous tense form is will be plus the verb plus ing or ing. For example, will be running, will be walking, will be teaching. As mentioned before, you can use contractions when using auxiliary verbs like will. We can use the future continuous tense to talk about continuous events we expect to happen in the future. Let's expand on this. You can use the future continuous tense to talk about events or actions that will likely happen in the future and continue for some time. For example, I'll be exercising at the gym tonight. She will be eating dessert tonight. The last type of tense we will be covering today is perfect continuous tenses. These are past, present, and future perfect continuous tenses. As you may have already guessed, they are a mixture between perfect tenses and continuous tenses. First, we have the past perfect continuous tense. The form of the past perfect continuous tense is had been plus the verb plus ing. For example, had been running, had been driving, and had been creating. As you know, you can use contractions when using auxiliary verbs like had. You can use past perfect continuous tense to describe a continuous event that started in the past until another point in the past. In other words, the continuous event stops before something else that's also in the past. For example, Naz had been studying English for 2 years before he moved to England. Naz's move to England is already in the past. His study of English is even before that. Therefore, the past perfect continuous tense is used to show that the event, studying English, happened continuously before another event, moving to England, which is also in the past. Next, we have present perfect continuous tense. The form of the present perfect continuous tense is as follows: has or have been plus the verb plus ing or ing. For example, she, he, it has been walking. I, you, we, or they have been walking. You can use present perfect continuous tense to talk about a continuous event that started in the past and continues until the present. Let's expand on this. In other words, the event or action started a while ago and is still continuing now. For example, the singers have been singing duets together since they were young. The present continuous tense shows that the singers still sing duets together now. In other words, the continuous action started long ago and continues until now. Our very last tense for this lesson is the future perfect continuous tense. Future perfect continuous tense can be used in the following form: will have been plus the verb plus ing. For example, will have been walking, will have been running, will have been teaching. Just a reminder that you can use contractions when using auxiliary verbs like will. You can use future perfect continuous tense when you speak or write about an event or action that will continue up until a time in the future. In other words, the continuous event or action, will happen in the future and continue up until a specific time in the future. For example, by next month, Joan will have been teaching history for 5 years. This sentence means that next month, Joan's teaching career will reach the 5-year milestone. It will be her 5-year teaching anniversary. In English, most verbs follow the rules you learned in this lesson. However, there are many irregular verbs that follow different patterns. In the Lesson 6 bonus lesson, you will learn all about irregular verbs and how to use them. So I hope that you will be attending the Lesson 6 bonus lesson. I would like to challenge you to practice the skills you learned in today's lesson. The following sentence is in present simple tense. I create art. Rewrite this sentence in all other tenses.